Good morning, everyone. My name is Kim James, one of the business partners at 360 Consult. I do a lot of change processes, so restructures, which we are expecting to see a lot more of in the coming months, and just general HR advice. So today we're going to be talking about some things that you should be thinking about now that we're in level 2, particularly things that your employees will be thinking about, such as their own health and safety. And then we've included some other topics such as working from home and some issues that we're expecting to see more of in the coming months. We will be speaking quite generally, but if you have any questions, just pop them into the Q&A section, and then if you want some specific advice, we can provide you with that as well. So I'll just get Hayden and Adrian to introduce themselves as well, and I'll share the slides.
Hey guys, I'm Hayden Martelli. I'm one of the business partners here at 360. I look after predominantly what have been recently classified as our essential service clients. So I've been quite busy through the whole level 4, level 3, and now level 2, getting businesses used to what is now their new norm. So I'll be running through a bit of the health and safety aspects of level 2 later on through this presentation. Just to help me with my presentation though, if anyone has got a unionised workforce, if they could just give an indication in the chat, and then I'll make sure I cover that off. If there's no unionised workforces, then we'll just dust on that a little bit and carry on.
Hi, I'm Adrian Tocker. I'm the Senior Associate here at 360. I guess for my sins, I look after things like collective bargaining and conflict resolution. So yeah, generally you have to deal with a lot of the more prickly characters from time to time in supporting businesses.
Can everybody see my screen? Okay. So now that we're in level 2, all workplaces can reopen with the guiding principle to play it safe. Obviously, good hygiene is really important at this time, but your health and safety obligations will go further than simply washing your hands in the workplace. And Hayden will talk quite a bit about your health and safety obligations later on in the webinar. I really want to emphasize how important communication is. It's important even in normal times, but particularly when we are in such an environment where there's so much change, communication becomes even more important with your staff. So in terms of what you should be doing next, just make plans on how you need your business to remain viable, and that could be making some changes to how you work and how your employees work. Plan how you're going to meet your health and safety obligations. And once you have a plan, make sure you communicate that clearly with your staff and potentially ask for their input and feedback on those plans as well. And if you're able to communicate early and regularly with your staff, it's going to help you avoid a lot of problems later down the track. We see so often in our day-to-day work as consultants that if people could just have a conversation, it could resolve problems and also prevent them from popping up or turning into bigger things than what they really should be. And I think it's important as well to let your staff know that if they have any concerns, that they can either come to you or come to their manager with those concerns, and then that will allow you to identify any problems as well. Cool. Flexible working arrangements. We are expecting to see more of these requests come through to employers at this time. I think particularly those people who have been working from home during the lockdown in level 3, have realised how efficient and productive it has been working from home. So you could be receiving requests that they work from home for a temporary basis or part-time during the week and only come into the office 1 or 2 days a week. Or they potentially would like to change their start and finish times to avoid rush hour traffic or avoid rush hour on public transport, which might be a bit of a mission considering they aren't running at full capacity at the moment. With these requests, it's important that you remember that there's only certain grounds that you can refuse them on, and you need to be responding to them as soon as possible in writing as well, and the requests need to be in writing too. And maybe you have also experienced the benefits of working from home, and if you have an office, maybe that's the way for you to save costs at this time in terms of saving money on rent. The Prime Minister has also indicated that people should be working from home if they are able to as well. We'll talk a little bit more about working from home later on, and safe operating procedures and health and safety as well. And it's also important to be taking into consideration some of the barriers that your employees may be facing when returning to the workplace, such as childcare arrangements or the difficulties of managing public transport at this time. I would encourage you to be flexible and just have a conversation with your staff to understand what their concerns are. But at the end of the day, if you have provided a safe workplace for your employees, and if your employee has no good reason not to be in the workplace, then you can require them to come into work. It's Hayden.
Rookie mistake, mute. Health and safety is still here. Not a lot has changed, except we've just got a new risk that we need to take into consideration. So we'll work through a few things today. So the first one is health and safety under alert level 2. What are our obligations? So what do you currently have in place? You should already have health and safety policies and procedures in place, and they will just need to now incorporate what the requirements are for COVID-19. And just remember that the basics are still there, that it's your responsibility to manage the risks, and COVID is just another risk that has been introduced. So what you need to do in managing that risk is you need to gather, review, and have available information around that risk. Where we've got unionised sites, what we're seeing a lot of happening in this space is that the unions are actually requesting that information so that they can have an understanding that their membership is safe on site. With the management of risks, you need to include how you would manage either a suspected exposure or an exposure. And what if due to an exposure, your whole business or parts of your business had to go into isolation? Well, what would this look like for you? And what lessons did you learn from going into level 4? Because it could be a reality if there was a localised outbreak that suddenly you're going to have to shut up shop quickly. You need to educate around the risks. So this is educating staff about the risks, including the management of them and their role in being diligent and complying with their health and safety obligations. And this could be as simple as updating the hazard register and reminding everybody of that and also of their reporting requirements. Compliance and effectiveness is another one. You need to make sure that you're actually auditing and checking that the systems that you're putting in place are actually working to alleviate the risk that you're trying to manage. Also, employers' duty of care to engage with workers. So under the Health and Safety at Work Act, there's actually an obligation as an employer to engage with your workforce. People with unionised sites will be aware of this because they will likely have union officials involved or delegates or members involved in the process. So it's just making sure that the engagement with your workers is happening in relation to COVID-19. So as well as the standard obligations, what we've seen additional requirements now is the public health requirements, which have come out on top. So this being the contact tracing and what that's going to look like for you. Do you already have it by default? i.e. is there a click and collect option running for you? Customers can only shop on account? Or like a lot of sites that certainly I go into these days with clients, before I'm even allowed in the front door, I have to sign in and then sign out. So if you've got that there, you've already got your contact tracing. If you don't, then you need to consider whether you want to have an electronic or paper-based one. There were lots of apps online. We're now seeing the government funneling into one app, being their app, but they've also got the paper-based system where you can download the PDF and have people sign that at the door. But then if we're signing it at the door, it raises the question, do you get people to bring their own pens? Do you provide pens? We've seen some systems where there's a clean cup and a dirty cup, and you transfer the pens across and then someone will sanitize them and pop them back. So it's just making sure that whatever contact tracing is happening, it's right for your organisation. Also need to take into account privacy considerations. There's been a couple of breaches I've seen already where people have inappropriately accessed that information. There was one young chap in Auckland who thought he might want to go on a date with a female customer who turned up, so I decided to contact her with her details. And so that's obviously raised some huge concerns. That's an outright breach of privacy. So as an employer, you need to make sure that you know what you're doing with that information, how you're going to intend on storing it, who's going to have access to that information, and as the government said, who's going to be destroying it after 2 months. There may also be some industry-specific requirements out there as well, like we've certainly got them in the aged care sector. So additional health and safety considerations we've got, as well as social distancing at work and what's going to be practical for you. So we've got the 2 metres versus the 1 metre. Some say they're inconsistent, they're not. The 2 metres is for when you're out in public and you're not actually sure who that person is that you're near. The 1 metre is for when you're in a workplace, when you've got contact tracing and you'll be able to track down those people should you need to for whatever reason. So with the social distancing, how are you going to ensure that the 1 metre rule is adhered to? And if it can't, what measures are you going to put in place? So there are some roles such as hairdressers, nurses, physios, etc., where contact is a part of their role. So it's not to say that it can't happen, it's just how you're going to manage that to happen safely. A lot of clients are setting up teams and having areas, so they'll have team A and they work in this area, team B in that area. They don't cross over the areas and they stick within their teams. Staggering start times and breaks. For industries where people need to clock in and clock out, how are you going to manage that? Do you have an old, where you punch your card to come in, or do people have to go and hand swipe or put their fingerprint into a system? What you're not wanting to have is everybody crowding around that system at the beginning and the end of shifts. So you may need to consider for a period of time how else you're going to clock in and out to ensure you can maintain social distancing. Other things that are happening is furniture is getting removed from places, particularly chairs. So you can only have certain people in a room, and knowing how many people are in that room based on the number of chairs, or a sign on the door as we've got in our offices to establish capacity for those rooms. And then within your offices as well, we've got the cleaning requirements. This is one which we've seen a lot of people overlook for somewhat, because we've got cleaning and we've got sanitising, and they're 2 very different things. So who currently cleans your office and how often is that cleaned? Think of the high touch areas in there, such as door handles, lift buttons. They're probably going to need to be cleaned more frequently. Is the standard of cleaning that is currently happening in your office suitable for a COVID-19 environment? And if your building is going to be split into areas, ask that you consider how these will be cleaned independently, because if you're going to have team A and team B in their respective areas, but the same cleaners using the same mops and vacuum cleaners across those areas, it just completely defeats the purpose. Air conditioning is another one that needs consideration. Can you have fresh air coming into your building, or is your building recirculating air? What filters do you have in place? When were those filters checked? Are they the appropriate kind of filters? All these sort of things need to be explored. And also the contractors and their cleaning. So when contractors are coming onto site, how can you ensure that their equipment has been sanitised and cleaned before it's actually coming onto your site from somebody else's? So all things to just think about and ponder within the space of health and safety. Also within health and safety, we've got PPE. This has been more prevalent than ever right now. So you need to work out what either roles or situations in your workplace may require PPE. And this could be very different pre-COVID and now with COVID. So is it the right kind of PPE suitable for what you're intending on using it for? What are the trigger points that will deem this ineffective? What we have seen is with the masks, for example, when healthcare workers are all kitted out in all of their gowns and their masks, they get quite hot, they get quite sweaty. And when they get sweaty, those masks become moist and then they become ineffective. Numbers as well. Do you have enough PPE to do this? You need to do the maths on what's going to trigger its use and what's going to trigger its changes. Take an aged care provider, for example. We had one with 35 residents. Those 35 residents were going through 300 gowns in 24 hours. So that's 2,100 a week or 8,400 a month. Do you have stocks like that on hand? Can your supplier keep up with you, or are you going to need to look to get it back up? Also, do employees know how to use PPE properly? 2 new terms for people coming out of this are donning PPE, which is putting it on, and doffing PPE, which is putting it off. This needs to be done correctly. Where it's not done correctly, the PPE can be deemed to be ineffective. then providing a false sense of safety and security for those employees and those around them. So have a look for the specific requirements in relation to that. The Ministry of Health website is really helpful in that space. Also, when it comes to disposing of the PPE, how's that going to happen? Is it just with your normal rubbish system, or do you need to set up a separate one? Storage and access. This was very topical at the beginning of the pandemic, when we saw a lot of PPE getting stolen from places. Now that the levels are coming back in, I think it's going to be a question of what's the level of trust within the organisation to just establish who's going to have access to it and where you're going to be storing that. Also, what if people wear PPE incorrectly? So we've all seen some very clever arrangements when we go into the supermarket around what people are wearing, but what's going to happen if somebody turns up to your workplace wearing PPE and their role has been deemed one where they don't need to wear it? Best in that situation to have a conversation with that person. First establish why they're wearing PPE and then make a decision around where you want to go to from there. Vulnerable and immunocompromised workers, won't touch too much on this because I would imagine that you're all well aware of who those people are within your organisation, but just make sure that you're not afraid to have conversations with those people. They will be expecting it. You need to have those conversations. You just need to understand what's going on for them in relation to their situation, in relation to work. A question that has come forward a lot is, can we make people come to work? Well, technically, no, you can't. But if they don't have any genuine reasons not to be there, there are processes that can be undertaken in that space. I think the last thing before I pass over to Adrian, I'll just touch lightly on strike action. So the unionised people out there, you'll know what strikes are. For everybody else, people can strike for health and safety reasons. However, when you're taking a strike for health and safety reasons, it's a very technical strike and there's a lot of hoops that need to be jumped through. I have heard workers talking about this. We know the unions are talking about it. So if you are hearing noise on that front, then get in touch with us and we'll be able to help you through. So over to you, Adrian.
Right. Thanks everyone for coming along today, and hopefully we can give you a little bit of information that you can take away. I've been tasked with at least talking about some of the changes as we move into this new realm of the level 2 world, or our new normal. So as we've mentioned, working from home is a big feature now in terms of how people have coped over level 3 and level 4. And a lot of businesses are now thinking, well, you seem to go okay then, what do we need to do now? Do we want to keep doing this or not? So I think in the mad rush, everyone had to deal with the last two situations. People sort of did what they could to make things work. I think what we're seeing now is that if you're going to institute working from home as more of a permanent exercise, you're probably going to need to start to think about doing that in a much more structured way. So that means thinking about whether you have policies, making sure that people are safe within their home working environment. So how do you do that? Do you have some sort of checklist? I mean, I don't think anyone really wants someone going out to someone's house to inspect their workplace, but it's definitely making sure that you've got something in place to understand, has the worker got appropriate setup there, so they're not going to suddenly end up with a bad back because they have got a poor setup at their workstation, or they've electrocuted themselves by, like me, using one of your extension cords you've had in the garage for the last 15 years, and it's probably not suitable to use. So having some conversations with your employees, and probably the most important part is setting, as Kim mentioned earlier with communicating, is setting those expectations between yourselves around what's okay, what isn't okay with working from home. One of the big things that's come about is that the issue of productivity, and I see the Prime Minister today was talking about looking to move everyone to a 4-day work week. Some workplaces that'll work really well, others it won't be. Again, it's just about setting expectations about what's going to be required from people over that period of time. Some jobs, I haven't seen too many bus drivers driving from home yet, but you never know what could happen. We've got drones flying bombs, so planes might not be that far away, buses may not be that far away. The other thing that I also noticed on the front page of the Herald today was about, they talk about this $15 allowance from working from home. They haven't, strangely enough, the media haven't got it quite right. IRD issued a determination a month or so ago about there are some certain things you can claim as an employer that you might have paid to an employee as tax-free. Now, I'd really advise, if you're going to look at that, get some advice from your accountant. It's not an obligation that you have to pay any of these particular costs, and that could be things like if someone's working from home, they've got increased costs around power, internet, heating, but it is something that the IRD provided for, that there's a certain amount of costs that can be paid to an employee as a reimbursement as opposed to income. Be very careful, because if you get over those levels, it suddenly becomes income and it all becomes liable for tax, whether that's PAYE or fringe benefit tax. So as I said, talk to your accountants. They're much more informed about this. Certainly I wouldn't proclaim to give all the advice, but I do know it is a risk, but it's also not an obligation. So really it's about what's appropriate for your business and what you can do in terms of setting it with your employees. Any other points on working from home, team? All right, we'll flick to the next slide. And the other thing that's come about is, as we've moved through this change and the impact on the work environment, is as we are seeing now, businesses are just having to make changes to remain viable. They've got to start to think about, okay, we've got a different economy, we've got a different customer base, we have to make changes to stay viable. So that really might mean for a lot of them to be able to reduce costs or to pivot to change the shape or the delivery of their business. Some of those things around costs could be reducing hours, reducing pays, restructures, using annual leave and that kind of stuff. Again, a lot of it comes down to making sure you're communicating well with your employees. You know, some of these things are not going to be particularly palatable for a whole lot of people, as we've seen with yesterday, Fletcher's in New Zealand laying off nearly 3,000 jobs. They are working through a process, and they have been working through a process to right-size their businesses for the new environment. So they are reducing, they're applying all of these particular things. Ideally, redundancy will always be a thing of last resort. But I think what we're seeing and why those big numbers drive the headlines, it's not those big companies that are going to be the most vulnerable. It's probably those smaller organizations where the numbers aren't 2,000 or 3,000, it's where those numbers are 2 or 3. So how do you work through that process? You know, making sure you're providing information about why you're doing what you're proposing, giving people that opportunity to comment on it. So keeping that good faith obligation on the way. Some of the things I think about around the wage subsidy, I'll talk a bit more about the wage extension shortly, but that is definitely a factor for a lot of businesses now as it comes towards the end of that first initial time. So how are you going to survive? But what we also have seen during these times is it's driving a lot of positive change. It's driving the fact that we can have things like this. We're using Zoom or Teams or GoToMeeting and other tools to have more virtual conversations, to have more ability to engage not just with employees, but with customers and potential customers. And it's being a much more accepted medium than it has been in the past. So I think there's lots of little bits and pieces like that, you know, home deliveries for groceries, probably taking off, click and collect types of services. A lot of stores where they might have had the thought of having an online sales offering have fast-tracked that now. And now they're looking to consolidate that as a new sales channel or a new service delivery channel that they weren't utilizing the most before. So there's all those changes that are going on within businesses to try and make sure, how do we make ourselves sustainable, make ourselves resilient in terms of the environment we're looking for. I mean, as I mentioned before, the biggest thing when you're implementing change is making sure you're communicating with your employees, setting that process. I mean, any of these processes need to be cautious and detailed, so you're not breaching any employment rights. But by the same token, where the business needs to make change to survive, probably that's the key at the end of the day. Businesses, we want as many as possible to keep going. Okay.
Just one more thing on this particular slide about changes. If you have got people who are on work visas, it's really important to check if that work visa has any particular restrictions attached to it. Some work visas, you can't go below a certain number of hours, or you can't go below a certain pay threshold. So just bear that in mind, and if you do have somebody on a work visa, ask them if they are aware of any restrictions that may apply to them.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Kim. Thanks for that. And I think Kim also mentioned earlier on about, you know, flexible work requests, that there are some grounds for employers to refuse. Look, those grounds aren't overly onerous on employers. They're pretty broad, so don't be overly concerned if it really doesn't make sense for the business offering or the way you conduct your business to be able to allow people for working from home or remote working. And I think that's one of the questions there, that I think those things are largely interchangeable, but you still have the same obligations as the employer. So just make sure it makes sense and that you're working through a process to understand expectations for all parties.
And just on the working from home thing too, I don't know if anybody's noticed, but Seek, when you're looking on Seek for a job now, you can actually select the regions. Working from home is now a region.
Yeah. So you see, all those sorts of things are the change that's come about through the environment we're facing now. Right. Wage subsidy extension. I think this has been a really useful tool for people, because the wage subsidy really has, I think, helped a lot of people remain employed over the last few weeks. But as was indicated in the budget, the government have indicated there is going to be an extension for the wage subsidy for another 8 weeks. It'll be at the same levels, you know, $5.85 for people that are working more than 20 hours and $3.50 for those that are less. The only real significant changes we can see, and we don't have all the detail yet, but the only one that's come out is that rather than a 30% drop in actual or expected revenue, they're looking for 50%. So we think that'll probably proceed on a pretty much similar basis to what exists at present. I would think that for some industries that will be very helpful. For aviation, for hospitality, for retail, those are probably going to be pretty easy criteria to do. But for a lot of other businesses that are now back operating, make that decision pretty carefully in terms of whether you can actually demonstrate in hindsight that you experienced a 50% drop in revenues. Because that's something that I think, you know, a lot of businesses are going to have to be able to demonstrate as MB work through their audit process over the coming months. So there's a heap of stuff that's happening around that, but we think that's been really, really helpful for people in terms of doing it. But think through that decision carefully, talk to your accountants to forecast what your revenue and cash flow predictions are going to be, because you do want to make sure that if you're getting that money, you know, it makes sense. That makes sense. The business is going to be able to survive through that process. What we have heard from a lot of our clients is, look, the wage sub has been great to buy people a bit of time, but unfortunately, because of these circumstances, the inevitable is still going to happen. So you've really got to balance up what's going to work for the business and the people that are involved.
Yeah, particularly when your staff will still continue to accrue leave over that period of time. So if you do get to the unfortunate stage where you are potentially going to have to let some people go, that's just another bunch of annual leave that you have to pay out with their with their final pay.
One question we've faced a lot is, do you have to retain people for the entire period of the wage subsidy? Our advice to people is you should be trying to do that, but if you can't, don't let that stop you in terms of making the decisions that are right for your business. What you will have to do, though, is any money that hasn't been passed on to particular employees would have to be repaid to MB, and you should be signalling that to MB as soon as possible. Once those decisions are made, that you say, I've got Joe Bloggs here, we've only paid him 9 weeks of the 12-week subsidy, so we're going to repay the additional 4 weeks.
And can you force people to take their annual leave during that time?
Yes, and yes and no. Not probably during that time. You can require people to take annual leave once you give at least 14 days notice, but it's also annual leave that's an entitlement as opposed to an accrual. So it makes sure that they've at least been there a year and that the leave is clicked over, rather than stuff they haven't quite become entitled to yet. Usually people are being able to do that by agreement. One of the things we have really found is, look, while all this change and all this uncertainty is going on, employees and unions are a lot more agreeable to changes than they have been in the past. We've seen, you know, reduction in hours, reduction in pay rates. That's happened and been easier for employers to reach agreement by some, you know, constructive discussions with people, because it's not something you can just force on people. And we know we've seen that happen, that especially in the early days of all of this, that a lot of employers just dropped their employees' hours to 80% of pay because that was what was linked to the wage extension. But there's a real problem with that, is you can only really do that by agreement. And if you haven't had agreement to it then, you've probably got some things to cover. Right, anything else, team? Nope. Cool. Kim.
Just talking about workload, it's been quite interesting because some businesses are finding themselves with too many people and not enough work. And then other businesses like hairdressers and couriers, they have too much work and not enough people, which leads to problems with itself, such as burnout. So just have a think about how you might potentially be able to manage if you do have too many people and not enough work. You could even ask those people if they would be able to help out in other areas of the business where there is work for them to do. Just have a conversation with your staff and get agreement with them and get that agreement in writing so that you're all on the same page. And we are also expecting to see an increase in employment problems as the dust settles. I think at the beginning of the lockdown, lots of agreements were made or lots of arrangements were made in a hurry, and the process may not necessarily have been followed correctly. And we have seen that employees have been really flexible, like what Adrian said. I just wonder how long that will last for once things calm down, once the dust settles, if they will then feel like they've been hard done by, or if they feel like they have been pressured into agreeing to something that they didn't want to. And because there will be an increase in anxiety and stress levels at work, that could lead to problems with itself as well. The issues that you would have been experiencing before lockdown are still going to be there now. Even if you are facing or just trying to 100% focus on the survival of your business and what your health and safety obligations are at this time, if you get a bullying complaint or a staff come to you with concerns, you still need to spend time addressing those in an appropriate manner. But we can help with that. We can take some of that weight off your shoulders as much as we can. And with increased anxiety and stress levels, you may experience some resistance with people not wanting to return to the workplace during level 2. For whatever reason that may be, childcare, just feeling anxious about going back into the public, if they're worried about getting the virus. Just have a conversation with those people and try and understand their reasons. But as Hayden said, if you're providing a safe workplace, then there are processes that you can do to require those people to come into work. And as I mentioned earlier, lots of companies are trying to get some staff who have capacity to help out in other areas. Some employment agreements do talk about this and will give you the ability to just have a kind of quick conversation with the staff and actually require them to focus their attention elsewhere temporarily. But just make sure that you do follow a process, make a proposal, get feedback from the staff member, and then make a decision. Any other topics that people are expecting to see in this space? No.
I think one thing to watch out for too is, even if you do the best process in the world to make somebody redundant and that person can't get another job, that person may come after you for a personal grievance purely for the financial aspect, because the frustrating thing in the space is it's often cheaper to pay somebody out than to then go and defend a case. So even the best process in the world is not immunity to personal grievances down the track.
There is one question here around a technical redundancy. Catherine's just asked, can you please talk about what a technical redundancy situation is, and if a change to hours or remuneration would be a situation that could trigger that?
Yep, I'm happy to cover that off and the team can jump in later.
Yep.
Technical redundancies generally tend to occur where someone might transfer from one employer to another, but pretty much all your terms and conditions tend to stay the same. So technically you are redundant from one employer, but you're being picked up by another, and a lot of vulnerable employers will pick that up. Where you are changing rosters, hours of work or pay rates, that needs a bit more careful review to see whether that would trigger a redundancy or not. If it's for short periods, it may not, but if it's permanently reducing someone's pay or reducing someone's hours and therefore pay as well, those are probably substantive changes to that terms and conditions of someone's employer. So that could be an argument to say, well, you've technically made my role redundant. Just remember, there is no legislated requirement for redundancy compensation. So it'll only really depend on what's in your employment agreements, whether that's collective or individual. Usually the only obligation that will be there will be related to the notice periods that are in your agreements. Anything else, guys, about technical redundancies?
No.
Yeah.
Let's jump onto the next slide and then we can go through everybody's questions.
Sorry, was that you, Kim?
Sorry, yeah. Do you want to go through some of
Oh,
these?
yeah, sure. So if you maybe just want to exit your shared screen there, just while we take the last couple questions.
Yeah.
I mean, Andy has got a few here specifically around the working from home and remote versus working from home, etc. And one of his last questions here is just, you know, given we're saying that it's ultimately got to make sense for the business, is that really a policy or is a variation to the employment agreement required? Because it's, you know, it's obviously getting fairly grey.
Yep, there's two aspects to that. Yes, and a lot of businesses now, if they are going to allow working from home, it's useful to have a policy because it sets those expectations and parameters as where the business can make that work. So that's what they use the policy for, is around setting those expectations rather than having to reiterate it in every single case. The other aspect too, is that some of the individual employment agreements, you know, one of the requirements of an IEA is to have a place of work. And if you've got a place of work as in the Auckland CBD and someone wants to stay living out in Pukekohe or something like that, which is 60k away and not have to commute, then you probably have to amend the employment agreement to just reflect that there's an ability to be flexible around those locations.
Yeah.
And do that by agreement.
Yeah, but you can,
agree.
if working from home isn't going to work for you as an employer, then you can refuse it. It's only if you get like a formal flexible working arrangement where you have to kind of be a little bit more careful on how you refuse that request. Because you need to do it as soon as possible. You have to do it in writing and there's certain grounds listed in the legislation that you can refuse it on. But like one of those grounds is if it would have a detrimental impact on their performance, which is pretty broad and open.
Or if it's going to cost the organisation more. So that's something. So it's not hard. They're not high bars to get over. I saw Andy ask that question about certain conditions to refuse working from home. I'm assuming that means if the employer doesn't want to, which is exactly what Kim and I were saying, but there could be the odd occasion too where the employee, while they might have had to do it over level 3 and 4, they'd actually want to get back into the office and do that. And if you change the business substantially to say, hey, look, we've realised we don't actually need an office anymore. We are going to shut down our office and everyone's going to work from home. And I think that, is that a fundamental change to their role? Potentially it could be.
Something also just around, I know you touched on redundancies and technical redundancies and sort of taking a bit of a step back here, but if people applied for that wage subsidy after the 27th, which obviously moves from the sort of best endeavours to actually retaining staff during that 12-week period, can they still make a decision to make a position redundant during that period?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. As Adrian said, this shouldn't stop businesses functioning. And if that's what you need to do for your business's future and to guarantee the future, then absolutely you can start that process. I see it's a bit of a double-barreled question there. So maybe, and we've had people who have been in receipt of the wage subsidy extend notice period out until the end of the wage subsidy so that people can then still reap the benefit of that wage subsidy. But it certainly should never stop you wanting to make changes that are necessary for your business. So if that is the case, get in touch and we can help walk you through what that process will look like for you.
Yeah. So very much our advice to our clients has been the whole way through, no, you don't have to wait till the wage subsidy period ends to start these processes and make those decisions. And you don't actually have to extend, in our view, the wage subsidy payments to an employee through that period as well. But just if you're not doing that, you've got to make sure you're prepared to repay that money to MB. That's a critical part of that, because if you try to keep it or even reallocate it to other employees, that's probably going to fall foul of your obligations under the declaration that you would have signed.
Yeah, it's been quite a common question that we've received is, can the wage subsidy go towards paying somebody's notice period? And the answer is yes, it can. So you can do it so that the last day of somebody's employment with you is the last day of the wage subsidy.
I'm afraid though, if you do have a unionised environment, there will probably be a union organiser that will turn around and yell and scream at you and say, you're not allowed to do this, you're in breach of the wage subsidy, you have to keep these people employed for these 12 weeks. Our view is that's very nice, they can have an opinion, but just truck on with what's the best thing for your business.